Good morning. I welcome the bravest participants of this conference who survived until the very last day. And I'm also welcoming new participants, Professor Jan Rydel, who just disappeared, but he will be back, I suppose. Oh, hello, hello. From the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity, the organizer of this conference. Let me introduce this panel. I'm Sławomir Kapralski, and this panel is called Shadows of War, Conflict and Memory Regions. We'll have two presentations. One speaker couldn't make it to the conference because of illness. So we'll have Azra Junuzovic from University of Sarajevo and OSCE, Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights in Warsaw. And then we'll have a presentation by two speakers. So I guess they somehow divide their duties and responsibilities. This is by Daniel Wutti and Andreas Hudelist from Alps-Adria University in Klagenfurt. Our discussant would be Burkhard Olschowsky from University of Oldenburg. So let us start. Azra Junuzovic will be speaking about the interplay of memory and globalization in various memorial sites in post-conflict Bosnia and Herzegovina. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm happy that my children would not ask me what this is about, because I'm not sure if I would be able to translate the title to them. But thank you very much for accepting my paper, and I hope that I will be able to at least give a glimpse of a research that I've conducted. And basically what I was trying to determine how remembrance processes contribute to recreation and reformulation of identities in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in order to do this, I did two things. I was looking at memorial sites from the past war in the 90s. And also I was looking at memorial sites from World War II. I was looking at 4 cities that are major administrative centers. I was looking at Banja Luka, which is the center of Republika Srpska. I was looking at the town Brčko, which is administratively united and has been under supervision of international community for quite a long time. I was looking also at city of Mostar, which is known for being a divided city between Bosniaks and Croats, and obviously I was also looking at Sarajevo, which is the capital and which praises itself for its multicultural spirits. So what I was trying to look is how dominant discourses change public and individual memories, and my main point of the research was trying to see whether there are any alternative forms of memory that would challenge the dominant ethnic nationalist narratives. And at the same time, the focus of the research was to look at how remembrance practices get reflected in social media and how globalized phenomena such as Facebook and blogs, how they react as memory agents and contribute to reformulations, reassessments, and reconstruction of social identities. Basically, in which sense how they blur these boundaries between individual and public memories in post-conflict society, because obviously there has been severe trauma and transition from authoritarian to democratic rule. And as a result of the research, it can be claimed that despite widespread instrumentalization of commemorative processes on memorial sites, there are alternative forms of memory and remembrance which include individual voices. In that sense, I claim that the role of social media and blogs is of particular importance as they bring the discussion on memorial sites to a global forum, connecting diaspora, refugees, returnees, and nationals in a virtual forum. In that sense, social media somehow become sites of recomposing where they replace other forms of communication that take place, what we would know ordinarily in cafes, assemblies, or public association. In a sense, even though they sometimes reflect the top-down approach, they also challenge these remembrance processes and dominant discourses. In few cases, as I will present, there are sites that aim to organize and bring action about what matters to individuals, and there are also sites where everyone's voice becomes equal. In that regard, I claim that alternative memories, which are found in social media and blogs, challenge somehow ethnically colored discourses about identities in post-war Bosnia and Herzegovina, and that they also offer an alternative interpretation. I will not go into definition of public memory, but I would just like to say that of particular interest of my work was really to see how these public remembrance affect the perception of identities, as dealing with the past in Bosnia and Herzegovina presents series of unresolved questions, starting with simple questions, which would even relate what is the date when the war started, what is the role and the character of the work to bring it to a more complex discussion. While most public remembrance practices today include so-called brand messaging from authorities, i.e. top-down approach. I was also trying to look whether there were some sort of anti-monuments in the way that Nora describes, some sites that would avoid clearly formulated political messages. And based on that formulation, when I was selecting memorial sites from the past war, I was trying to look at memorial sites that would clearly avoid these interpretations that would present memorial sites, for example, only to soldiers, which you can find in almost every small town in the country. In other words, I was interested in memory in action, and I was particularly interested in observing it. And the basic premises was that I wanted to look at this fluidity, flexibility, and fluctuation that reflects relations within a divided society, and mediation through which this contact is being mediated. So when analyzing comments on the internet, what I was trying to do, I was conducting some interviews, I was also looking at memorial sites, and I was also analyzing the content of the newspapers that are found online. But what was interesting that in all 8 cases, and I will present the memorial sites that I was researching, almost all of them, apart from the 2, had very constant presence on the internet, which is why I decided to focus on that. So what I have concluded is that social media offered the space to recompose the narrative of the event by reinterpreting it obviously from an individual point of view, whether it is to strengthen dominant discourses or to provide alternative voices. Social media in that sense, like my blog, my Facebook page, in many cases feel to the core of my identity, who I am and what I stand for. In that sense, they, in my view, offer the ability to tell an individual view of history, perception of what the commemoration site means to me. And on the web, obviously, we are all on our own. We are surrounded by our virtual friends. So in most cases, you will find free comments where people will say things that very often they would not express in one-on-one conversation. And this was obvious to me when I was speaking to some representatives of associations who were very careful when, trying to present their views on the past war, whereas if you look just on any of these groups, you would find all sorts of comments that would borderline with insulting for certain groups. In that way, social media offer the space to comment on visual presentation, first of all. They also offer the possibility to reinvent the site and reimagine the physical site by looking through and at my screen without having to be necessarily physically there. And secondly, discussion on the social media remains permanently on the web unless the comment is removed by the individual who has posted the message, thus potentially contributing to creation of new dialogues. You can see that sometimes the posts who have been there for 6 years have been revived and would start to be commented again. And this permanence of the posting, as opposed to the temporality of our own speech, would enable everyone to become a part of public dialogue. And also, as we have seen in some part of the world with political developments, they also allow for this bottom-up approach. While my claim is that while in the case of anti-monuments, we offer our individual reflections on public constructs of memory, in the case of social media, my individual reflection becomes public, and at the same time it loses its individual character and immediately becomes a part of a larger community, whether it is to allow faster civic involvement or to oppose the commemorative practices, one may agree or disagree. So in that sense, I claim that the process of public memory becomes accelerated through the social media, which could have never been seen a few decades ago. And this easy transformation and shifting from private into public realm with permanence and retention of individual thoughts and reflections is amassing exponentially. There has been some research about the characteristics of networked publics, which mentioned the digital nature of memory, which talk about persistence, replicability, visibility, searchability, and also connectivity. But because of the length, and I think what is more interesting for you is really to go into details and to present you with the research. I will not go into in details about that. My additional claim in this is that social media, as I said, while they offer these sites of recomposing, is they create these new groups, virtual groups, as we know, because they unite us based on our affinity or affiliation, where, you know, we will not see regularly certain individuals coming together in physical space. What I mean by that is that in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, this may include people who are coming from the same city with a shared history of their childhood before the war, diaspora who is currently living in North America, Western Europe, who may have completely different histories of their immigrant lives, displaced person who had to face refuge and now they are living somewhere else, and those just who think that they share values of a particular site, particularly in the case of World War II memorials. In that sense, there is also this perception of virtual shared identity where I joined a Facebook group and I want to share my own ideals with common values and shared characteristics which are similar to most people, because in very few cases there are opposition to the values that you've seen that a particular group promotes. So what I was looking at is, I mentioned the 4 sites, and I mentioned that I was looking at blogs and I was looking at social media. These are the memorial sites from the last war, and this is the Memorial Live, which is located in the center of Banja Luka. It was erected to mark the death of 12 babies that died at the clinical center, and they passed away due to lack of oxygen, which was caused by the embargo which was imposed by the international community. There was a closure of corridors at the beginning of the war. So the babies suffered the lack of oxygen and they died, and in memory to that, authorities decided to erect this monument. And what you see, these 12 circles, they present the small shapes, the uteruses and the small lives that were just about to live. What is important to mention is that this group of children who were there were of mixed origin. They were not only of one ethnic origin, but the main conclusion is that very often this monument is seen through the lens of the dominant discourse, representing the tragedy of the Serbs. And if you look at the blogs, they highlight the responsibility of international community for this tragedy, while, for example, the side from Republika Srpska is seen in a more passive and victimized role. This interpretation is what received the symbolic capital and is further projected. Even though when you look in social sites, there are statements about the need to remember all children victims wherever they died during the war, still this memorial site implicitly transmits and adopts the dominant narratives, which very often present Serbs as the victims of the falsely formulated policies of international community, where Serbs are only presented as aggressors, whereas they were also victims too. Yes, I will do this. Facebook group 12 Babies contains 55 followers, and I just want to say that also there you will very often see the comments that presents them as victims of the UN and that they are victims of the international community. The second site is called the Sarajevo Roses. These are the shell holes that have been filled out with red paint. There are no comments there, but what you very often see are the blogs that are calling people for action. In most cases, blogs comment on the passivity of the authorities to basically to take care of these shell holes. In many cases, if you pass through them, you will see that these red marks have been decayed or lost color, even though in certain parts of the town they have been more prominent, particularly in the case of a massacre which took place on Markale. But on blogs, they are seen as really something that people should go on their own, and they should paint them, and they should put the signs that this has been done by the citizens of Sarajevo. The third monument is the monument to Bruce Lee, and why it is important is that there are two monuments to Bruce Lee that have been erected in the whole world. One is in China, and the other one is in Mostar, and it has been erected by three intellectuals to oppose the divided spaces, to oppose what they call poisoning of public spaces by ethno-nationalist monuments. And what you see is that the monument was sprayed the moment it was put up in the park. It was sprayed. It had to be removed, and then on the request of citizens, it had to be put back because the monument itself started to be seen. Also, if you look at blogs, as something that challenges and that presents some sort of a touristic capital that can present this opposition to Mostar that is only seen as divided city that cannot function and that's divided between eastern side and the western side. And the last three monuments are, and why they are important, these are the monuments to fallen soldiers of three armies that fought in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and they're located in Brčko, which I mentioned, that has been ruled by the international community. And first of all, there has been a monument erected to the Serbian fallen soldiers because the city was administered by, this is the one on the top, by the Serbs during the war. And then because the international community decided this cannot go on like this, they decided that there will be two other monuments erected. So it's really a paradox that you see in the span of 1 kilometer, you see the monuments erected to three different armies. But what was interesting that in these three cases, there has been no internet presence whatsoever, apart from the monument that is here. This is the monument erected to the Croatian soldiers, which comments on the Masonian look of the monuments and how the public funds were misspent. Since I was told that I don't have a lot of time, I will just briefly present the monuments from the World War II. And I will just like to say that, as in many parts of Eastern Europe, what we see is the displacement of the memories from the World War II with the change of regime. But I think what is even more interesting is that the narratives from the World War II become reinterpreted through the lenses of the last war. So very often when you look at on Facebook pages, because in all cases, except for Brčko, you would find very active Facebook pages that present a nostalgic view of the past, where we've all lived together in brotherhood and unity, which has all been destroyed with the arrival of new regimes. But what you also see is the interpretation that, for example, in the case of this monument, which is really massive, and the reason I put up this picture is you can see it, if you go to Banja Luka, it's quite a big city, but you can see the monument from all parts of the city. And this monument is very often being interpreted, are there any Croatians put on the sides, are Serbs put to be seen only in the bad light, which again was something of interest to me. In the case of Mostar, this is a partisan graveyard, which represents 600 tombstones of the youth, but is again seen as the Facebook page and those who are advocating for the reconstruction of memorials, because these groups are very often calling for civic action. It's seen as representing only one political fraction of ruling Mostar, and in that sense it does not offer any alternatives to basically unite the memories of the city in question. And in Sarajevo, the memorial site is seen is one of the few memorials where you see the role of women and as presented as heroic figures, just as in Brčko. And again, similarly to Mostar, is seen as something that we have to bring back this past, because this is where we live together in harmony, and it reflects the multicultural characteristic of Sarajevo. Brčko, I will not go into very many details. Again, this is the monument which is in the best shape. It has big support of public authorities because it's seen as reflecting the diversity of the city. And what I just want to say in conclusion is that, as I mentioned at the beginning, yes, there are some individual voices. You can claim to a certain degree that there are some characteristics of cites the memoir, but overall, I think what you can say is that there are challenging public spaces in the country, and there are also voices that are challenging them. And I think one thing that will remain for further research is what will be the impact of these individual voices, and to which extent they will enable the society to deal with the past. Because what you can really see in the current construction of Bosnia and Herzegovina is that these narratives are existing all in parallel, and that there is no dialogue between them. So I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Perfect, Jam. Thank you very much. And now let me invite Daniel Wutti and Andreas Hudelist to present their talk on the memory of the Second World War and National Socialism in multicultural region. And the region in question is Carinthia, Kärnten.
Koroška. Thank you very much for the possibility and for accepting our paper to talk about a part of our project that deals with different memories in the region of Carinthia. We're working at the university there, and our interest is in the parallel memories existing there and coexisting with each other and also interfering with each other. So today we want to give you an insight of a part of the project that hasn't been finished until now. So to talk about the past is also always something that means that we talk about the present too. How we perceive not only our environment, the people, the locations around us, but also the architecture of buildings or the city, and of course memorials. Memorials means renegotiating the immediate present and the prospectively future. As Carlos Kolbel emphasizes, the past, present, and future are not separated, but influence each other. Memory gets renegotiated, and in every minute we're speaking. Nevertheless, mostly there is no variety of memory narratives, but one or two, and those are dominating the collective memory. Following Maurice Halbwachs, this collective memory of history is different in two respects. First, the collective memory is resulting of an ongoing process, and secondly, there are several different memories existing at the same time. Past events live in the consciousness of a group running for as long as this group is interested in. Collective memory cannot be divided in before and after. It tells the story like a dramatic fabric over several divided acts. A new act continues with the topics, people, and meanings of the act before and competes them with new ones. If a community is no longer interested in certain topics, it doesn't mean that this topic ceases to exist. Rather, there is a split which leads to the formation of two or more memory communities with different interests that exist side by side and eventually compete with each other. In this paper, we want to show how different narratives can be constructed or deconstructed on a regional level. I will give the more theoretical framework, and my colleague will present you some results of interviews. So, to remember and communicate the memories of National Socialism means therefore to go in a dispute that involves the active participation and emancipatory demands following the French philosopher Jacques Rancière. To change the field of remembrance significantly, it is only possible to create a dissent. While consent is very important for policy because it creates, through governing the distribution of shared interests, a community feeling of belonging to each other or a feeling most people can identify with, Rancière points out that policy denies equality. Quote, "It is the power of the one more, the power of anyone, which confuses the right ordering of policy," he points out. To change memories means to provoke the current discourse with opposite claims that shake the dominant narratives in its history, genesis, and current state of the art. It is important not only to create a conflict, but to confront the field of memory with a possible new order, with a new narrative. Only in this way it can be shown that memories are constructions and they have to be constantly subjected to a process of reflection in society. When we speak of memories, we mean an active process of reconstruction of the past, a process to initiate, control, and customize the memory in the present. Especially in contemporary times, we have to take a closer look on the structures of power between people and the preferred memories to share. The obvious conflict lies in the conflict between individual and national or regional memory, a conflict that decides what intensity of ruling or being ruled is carried by people. This contradiction defines the subject that is defined by part-taking in form of action and in the undergoing that corresponds to this doing. Rancière claims politics does not simply presuppose the rupture of the normal distribution of positions between the one who exercises power and the one subject to it. It also requires a rupture in the idea that there are dispositions proper to such classifications. Therefore, memory work is political. If we agree that the construction of memories is made by an ongoing process of negotiation, we understand the political notion following Rancière. Here the confrontation can be only realized if there is a party that can regulate the construction. Following Rancière, this process has not to do anything with politics. For the regulation of knowledge, he uses the term police. Police always maintains the structures and reproduces norms and order, while requesting others to follow the given structure, or in this case, narrative, memory, the story. In the following, we will reconstruct one of Austria's biggest and great myths. Drawing on the understanding of being Nazi Germany's first victim, the Waldheim affair in the 1980s gives a break from where we will tell the beginning of an ongoing dissensus of the Austrian memory of World War II. Austria's national memory of national socialism was solely guided by political interests. As foreign policy insisted on this status, the construction of being Nazi Germany's first victim remained dominant until the international affair of Kurt Waldheim in the 1980s. Up to that moment, Waldheim was Austria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Secretary General of the United Nations. During his campaign of the election as President of Austria in 1985, investigative journalist Alfred Worm published in Profil that in a recent autobiography of Waldheim, the years between 1938 and 1945 were not mentioned. First, Waldheim denied his participation as a soldier during the war and denied both his membership in the National Socialist German Students' League, as well as his affiliation in the Sturmabteilung SA. Waldheim himself stated that he had never left the desk, but have known about the reprisals against partisans. He would have never fired a gun or have seen a partisan. At that moment, Austria's Chancellor Bruno Kreisky, of Jewish origin, stated publicly that the allegations against Waldheim are horrible and Austria would not listen to a broad whom they want to have for president. Until this point, we can see how Rancière's notion of police is working. Although Waldheim's past during World War II asked for the role of Austrians in National Socialism, politicians tried to follow their narratives they constructed after the war. Here the police is working on a story that discharges Austria and its inhabitants from any guilt. Following Rancière, the politicians are not doing politics, but the work of police. Quote, "The police is not a social function, but a symbolic constitution of the social." Quote end. The so-called Moscow Declaration of 1943, a document of the Allied forces, mentioned Austria as the first country being victim of Hitler's aggression. However, this declaration contained also a certain paragraph remembering Austria on its definite responsibility in the wars on the side of Nazi Germany. There was the plan to clarify Austria's position in Austria's State Treaty in 1955, but in the verge of doing so, Leopold Figl, Austria's Minister of Foreign Affairs, could convince Allied parties to not mention their joint guilty in the treaty. So Austria could be neutral, and both fascist and Nazi organizations were prohibited. Moreover, in the Moscow Declaration, if Austria should arise again with its borders and before the year 1938, Austria had to prove a contribution for the liberation of Hitler's Germany. That means Austria had to name or prove resistance against Nazi Germany. Although in the official and private memory, the Carinthian resistance and liberation fighters were mostly negatively connoted as Yugoslav fighters for communism, they were taken as exactly this argument to prove Austria's resistance against Nazism. Carinthian partisans were mostly, but not exclusively, Carinthian Slovenes. Even today in Austria, the importance of this large, continuous, active partisan resistance in Europe is downplayed and marginalized. Since Waldheim admitted finally in the 1980s that he took part in National Socialism, but disliked every other Austrian, he wanted to find an excuse for himself. But in the end, he explained officially that Austrians were not victims, but perpetrators, and that officially. And the accusation was made in Austria and by an Austrian. Here, the break of Austria's construction of a victim's narrative to a narrative of complicity begins officially. Simultaneously, it is also the beginning of politics following the political understanding following Rancière. Politics is first and foremost an intervention upon the visible and sayable. It is especially our interest to do research on the visible and sayable nowadays. For the last decades, initiatives are working on counter-memories to the official state memory, of official state narrative. A broader memory of National Socialism has been created that do not lead solely in Austria as a perpetrator, but in a variety of stories which challenge the national memory and the police work by politicians. Not only soldiers were memorized, but also victims of euthanasia, the minority of Carinthian Slovenes, Jewish people, Sinti and Romanis, Jehovah's Witnesses, and people who were hunted for political reasons. So still today, because of the variety of memories, the national narrative and regional or individual memories are contradictorily negotiated, especially in Carinthia.
It is the engaged work of a number of commemorative initiatives and organizations spotlighting another Carinthian memory culture. With their continuous fostering of different perspectives on memory, it seems they succeeded in breaking decades of silence for the victims of National Socialism. As there has not been research so far on this topic, a certain step in our project was a qualitative pilot study about competing memories on National Socialism and World War II in Carinthia. 5 witnesses who survived the war have contacted the project team through a placed newspaper article about our project. They were asked to talk about their remembrance during World War II and the period of National Socialism. During the Nazis' reign in Carinthia, all of them were between 10 and 20 years old, now around 80, 90 years old. From the region's capital, Klagenfurt, we interviewed 3 people. One person was interviewed at the very north of Carinthia, one person at the very south, near to the border to Slovenia. Future studies could also take into account persons from other regions. The east of Carinthia seems interesting because concurrently most Slovene-speaking population is present there. In Western Carinthia, however, it seemed for decades that Slovene language faded away already. However, in the last years, new local organizations were founded to promote Old Slovene regional dialects. Not only a few members seem to have the vision to learn and promote Slovene dialects again, the dialects of their grandparents, which their parents, the middle generation, never learned. The first results of the pilot study seem quite promising. First analysis with qualitative content analysis show the following results. Person 1, we call her nostalgic denying Holocaust. A woman above the age of 90 was found in this category. In the interview, she pointed out positive elements of the rule of National Socialism in Carinthia. Her family gained wealth, her parents found a job. The woman argued personally she never experienced negative aspects of National Socialism. After the Nazi rule, her father was arrested for being a potential Nazi criminal. According to the woman, this was an unjust action. She describes the 2 years period of her father being arrested as the worst period of her life. Her family lived in poverty after National Socialism and just slowly came to a normal life again. The woman quite clearly described her opinion of mass murder of Jews during National Socialism being a fictitious lie. In the interviews, she stated a number of evidences that the numbers of murdered people are, for example, wrong. What is taught today in schools and transmitted in concurrent memory about negative aspects of Nazi reign is wrong, she concludes. Person 2, Slovene-rooted, denying it. After an interview with husband of this interviewed woman about his memories on World War II and National Socialism period, it turned out that the group interview with two of them, the married couple, on their Slovene roots and the Slovene elements of the region could be interesting. It took place another day. Both interviewed persons argue there are simply no Slovene roots in the region. Instead, Slovene language appeared after World War II as a matter of Yugoslav interest. It was not Slovene, but Windisch spoken before in the region. Windisch is understood as a dialect vernacular language, a mixture of northern influences dating back to old Celtic tribes in this theory. It is clear that from a linguistics point of view, these arguments can easily be proved wrong. However, they still seem quite present in Carinthia. Person 3, the story of a child raised during NS period. The woman found in this category was a child during NS period, becoming 13 at the end of World War II. She states her family lived in a rural village. Although being considered as German, they did not benefit much from National Socialism's period. During these years, she did not recognize any worse elements of the Nazi rule. Her most significant memories are memories of Belarusian soldiers camping near to their village some days. However, after the end of World War II, she slowly recognized the inhumanity of National Socialism. She condemns this time nowadays, thinking of how so many people could be seduced and blended. She stresses the importance of educating the youth about World War II and National Socialism even today. Person 4, realizing and regretting. This person has been made, this interview has been made with a man around 90 years old. He described being blended and seduced by the ideology of National Socialism in the times of his youth. Soon after the end of this period, he recognized his failures and began accounting the past. In order to save his memories to younger generation, he wrote a number of biographical manuscripts. Sharing these manuscripts just to family members, his aim is to let the youth know about the mistakes made in past. Proudly, he states that most family members appreciate his efforts. I will skip the 5th person. Previous research in this topic was done with 3 generations of members of the Slovene community, Slovene minority in Carinthia. 3, the generation of the contemporary witnesses, the middle generation, which is again the first generation born after National Socialism's period, and the generation of today's youth, which can be counted as the generation of the grandchildren of contemporary witnesses. During the period of National Socialism, Carinthian Slovenes had either to deny their Slovene roots to assimilate, were brought to German working camps or concentration camps, or they joined Yugoslav partisan army. In the small Slovene community in Austria, these narratives are yet very present. A comparison of the subjects of the Slovene population with subjects of the German-speaking majority population in Carinthia shows the following aspects. Slovene-speaking population is over all 3 generations very connected with the topic of World War II and National Socialism. Carinthians concurrently identifying with Slovene minority in the region seem to have a strong narrative being victims of National Socialism. All 3 generations know about their family history in World War II and during the period of National Socialism. They know stories of extreme discrimination of family members or people near them. Members of Slovene minority over all 3 generations have an emotional connection to the period of World War II and National Socialism, although it's more than 70 years back. In contrast to that, memories of German-speaking population on World War II and the period of National Socialism seem less detailed. It seems that Carinthian Slovenes had much more opportunity to use their minority structures to hand down their narratives. While the minority of Carinthian Slovenes succeeded in passing on their narrative as victims of National Socialism, it seems that the German-speaking majority population did not. Emotionally, subjects in 4 out of 5 cases, which I mentioned before, were not able to share their experiences in World War II and National Socialism with younger generations in a satisfying way for the families. What was shown already in the context of the Waldheim affair was once more proved by some of the interviewed persons. Also, the German majority population in Carinthia still has a tendency to construct and build a victim on a victim narration. They also built on a victim narration. Harald Welzer describes this quite clearly when he presented results from a representative study for Germany. More than 70 years after World War II, just 2% of Germans think their parents or grandparents had very positive attributes to National Socialism. 4% think their older family members saw National Socialism as positive, and 15% of Germans think their family members were active in resistance. According to Dan Baron, the average German family never faced moral responsibility and passed on this habit also to the next generation. We think it's very similar in Austria. One explanation for this fact was already mentioned in the 1970s. Germans after World War II had to deny narcissistic elements such as megalomania in people's community, and they had an inability to mourn their beloved leader Adolf Hitler, stated Alexander and Margarete Mitscherlich. Instead, a first process of grief after National Socialism should then lead to a disentanglement, they argued. A highly polarizing thesis, also in psychoanalytic scientific discourse, where they came from. However, social psychologist Markus Brunner proposed lately to reread this theory in a trauma theoretical way. He distinguishes a trauma on victims for a cryptization of perpetrators. So there's a trauma for victims and a cryptization for perpetrators. This differentiation should explain also why narration and handing on the past is more difficult for members of the German-speaking population in Carinthia and much easier for members of a small Slovene community, although both are actually using a victim narration for decades. We're coming to the conclusion. In Carinthia, the commemorative initiatives and organizations are not only spotlighting a different memory culture in opposition to the national narrative, but a variety of possible narratives, which do not exclude each other, but broaden both the narratives about and memories of World War II. There is no final single narrative of our history. In fact, there are many traces left by the same event, which in time sediment in the individual consciousness as well as in the collective consciousness, and that are often consciously or unconsciously hidden or removed. Traces that nevertheless stay and that suddenly or predictably re-emerge each time the historical, political or cultural context changes. The cultural memory can only consist of a variety of narratives. The qualitative interviews show the different narratives of victims and perpetrators, not only of the past, but also on the handling with the past in the present. Thank you.
Thank you to Daniel and Andreas, and now let me invite our discussant, Burkhard Olschowsky, with his comments on the papers we've listened to.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank Daniel, Andreas, and Azra for your presentation, which were very insightful. I was preparing on, a comment still with 3 presentations, and because the Northern Ireland presentation, which was done today, was to some regard a link, but I will still try to find a common ground. First, I tried to find some similarities between the Carinthian case and the Bosnian-Herzegovinian. Of course, both presentations were reflecting the remembrance of wars of different durance, periods, and circumstances. And we have to do it either with ethnic conflicts, as in the case of Carinthia, with their Austrian and Slovenian population. And additionally, in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have a religiously motivated conflict between Muslim Bosniaks and Orthodox Serbs. Both conflicts did happen, or you might say still happen, in border region with a limited geographical scope. I think that's also happens in a Northern Ireland case, but I don't want to mention it either. Further features of both regions are that both were part of another major state, like Austria or even Slovenia on the other side of the border. and in the Bosnian case, of course, Serbia, and in a sub-context also Yugoslavia, I guess. And so this might characterize the particular code of memory in which those people there feel often committed in coherence or even in separation to the major states. One call them mother states or kin states, well, in the case of Slovenia, for example. What does this mean? Now I'm a historian. I would like to give at least a short historical background for some of you it might be useful. Firstly, after the fall of the Habsburg monarchy in 1918, Carinthia became a part of Austria, which was connected with a highly disputed part of South Carinthia, which wasn't at that time part of Austria, but it became after it became part of Austria after a referendum in 1920. I mention it because that's a very pivotal event and a very pivotal event for today's consciousness in Carinthia. It's connected with the so-called Abwehrkampf, so defensive struggle against the Slovenian or even the Slavonic influence from the south, from the Balkan. This story, and another thing is that during the Second World War, the Slovenian Carinthian people experienced numerous repression by the National Socialists. They were deported to concentration camp, and this that's why many of them joined the resistance movement and were later on stigmatized as Tito partisans. And this story, of course, hardly fit in the Austrian narrative from the so-called first victim of the National Socialist. After 1945, as you mentioned, the Slovenian population was rather pushed back systematically, and they were simply withheld from their minority rights over decades. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, you allow me also to give a short, looking back, was also until 1918, part of the Habsburg monarchy. Then it became part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. From 1941, Bosnia and Herzegovina was part of the vassal state Croatia, which was a vassal state on behalf of the Third Reich. After the declaration of independence, Bosnia and Herzegovina in 92, it affected a 3 years long bloody war between the Bosnian and primarily the Serbian side. And due to international pressure and the so-called Dayton Agreement in 1995, this war ends. However, it left in a devastated country and as you rightly said, in a large degree, and a traumatized population. In both cases, we have just in the last years, I would say in the last 10 or 15 years, attempts to bridge the gap of hostility, fear, and mistrust. Of course, we should discuss to what an extent these attempts were successfully or they failed, and that's open for discussion. Now, some significant differences between both present cases. The degree of violence and traumatization in the Bosnian War was certainly much more higher than in Carinthia. Also due to the fact the Bosnian War happened just 20 years ago and still in our memory, and in particular in the memory of the people there, very vivid. Places like Srebrenica are still a hot memory site, which we have learned also yesterday. It seems to me in this regard, it's hardly comparable with memory sites like the farm Permershof in Carinthia. That's a special site where Carinthian partisans were hiding, and they were finally they were explored by National Socialists and special units, and they were most of them they were murdered in this case. So, according to Aleida Assmann, one might call that the Carinthian history, contemporary history, is part of the functional memory, Funktionsgedächtnis, but not any more than part of a communicative memory, but not yet part of the storage memory, Speichergedächtnis. Another main point, I guess, is the reinvention of the term ethnic cleansing, which it's a significant difference between both cases. Ethnic cleansing is a synonym of expulsion and mass killings. It was reinvented through the Bosnian War, although we know it happened all through the 20th century. Ethnic cleansing was very often closely related to war. War provides the cover for rulers to carry out projects of ethnic cleansing, and and these projects were afterwards regularly scrutinized and condemned in peace times. This might explain why the ethnic cleansing of the Bosnian War got afterwards so much attention to the international community, and might also explain the willingness to intervene there then later on in the Kosovo War in 1999. Now I would like to have put some questions for as well as Andrea and Daniel as well as Azra. After reading your paper, I got the impression that in a very complicated Austrian case, with this really entangled history, we have a lot of separate memories, and the discrepancy between first the historical knowledge and by Austrian historians, but they are part of the international community, of course. Then we have the public opinion or the consciousness in Austria in general, but in particular in Carinthia. And it seems to me there's a slightly difference, or even a big difference, on the events of the Second World War and how Austria took part in these events, and in particular in the war. How do you would evaluate this situation, and is there any chance that the historical knowledge might path their way into the common Carinthian or even Austrian consciousness about the war? You mentioned different cases like the Waldheim and other ones, but these Carinthian case with the Slovenian population, it's a very particular one. Another question, does Slovenian institutions, for example, NGOs or governmental ones, did they care, or do they care then for the history and the identity of the Slovenian population in Austria or in Carinthia? Is there a mass exchange about that, or even between Slovenian and Austrian historians? But also then on the governmental level, I would be very interested about that. Then two questions or three questions then to Azra. Thank you then for your wonderful presentation then with memory sites. Memory sites are, of course, very static. They say much about then the intention when they were built and, well, as you said, and to glorify resistance leaders, or to remember a group of victims at a given time, of course. But these memory sites are built for a long time, but now we see them in a different way after political changes and different contexts. So how do you would evaluate the situation, or is there a possibility to explain certain memorial sites? These phenomena or these problems we also have, for example, in Berlin, with, in particular in East Berlin or in the former GDR. So was there any debate, or is there any chance to explain today's visitors and the historical process, as well as the intention by building these monuments? And in your presentation, you mentioned then the importance of internet by creating a dialogue about the past, which is, on the one hand, very convincingly, but internet and blogs have also one disadvantage, or several disadvantages at least. On the one hand, you have, as you rightly explained, the freedom of explanation, and they're not censored. But on the other hand, sometimes blogs or internet comments are not very sustainable, and you open the door also for, I would say, conspiracy theorists, and sometimes it's very hard to distinguish or to sort out those, well, foolish thoughts from right thoughts, or conspiracy theorists from other ones, and is this happens also in the case of the Bosnian War?
Okay, thank you, Burkhard. And now maybe the speakers would reply to your comments, and then we'll collect a couple of questions from the audience, right? Shall we keep the order of presentations, or how would you want to?
Thank you for your questions. I would say that in terms of the political changes and maintaining memorial sites, there has been some research, particularly when it comes to World War II memorial sites. Also, the changes of many monuments in smaller cities have been removed. For example, the busts of partisans have been moved and they have been replaced. What you can also, and there is lots of evidence on that. There is actually quite a good book that I'm also quoting in this research. What is also quite interesting is that many streets who had the names of big leaders have been renamed. But one phenomenon that I think you see in former Yugoslavia in general, not only in Bosnia and Herzegovina, is that these names have been replaced with the names of other big leaders that are good for the current democratic regimes. And I think one very interesting thing that I have observed is that these memories in post-authoritarian regimes, such as in former Yugoslavia, and I'm calling them regimes even though we are talking about democracies, but what you are seeing is that in these political parties, very often you have one strong autocratic leader, like, let's say in Croatia, Tudjman, or during the 90s in Serbia, Milosevic, or afterwards Tadic, and so on, that these memories or the ways in which you are looking at the developments have been replaced just by other big names, either from political sides or historical figures that are reflecting current political priorities. And I think only in the case of Brčko, which I've shown, do you see that memories of the World War II are reinvented as something that's positive and good, as reflecting the diversity of the city. In Mostar, there has been an attempt to do that, but again, as I mentioned, it has been reinterpreted from the point of view of the conflict which took place also during the war between the Bosniak and the Croat side. So the way in which the partisan memories have been seen is that they are only fitting the side of the Bosniaks, and that one side, and this is the Croatian side, they don't want to be seen because there have been also crimes committed by the partisans, which have also been commemorated in Croatia, and that for some people, I'm not saying it's for all, it's basically seen as a forceful attempt to unify it, instead of trying to basically allow these memories to coexist, even when it comes to conflicting memories of World War II. And also, and I will finish with that on the response to this question, what you can see that the memories of World War II in the former Yugoslavia have been used basically to project the unifying image of partisans, and that in many cases ethnic cleansing that has been presented by the forces of Draža Mihailović or followers of Chetnik movement or Ustasha, they have been basically borrowed underneath, and there has never been also dialogue between that. And what you're and now all of this is being reinterpreted in the context of World War II, and many people do not want to see the memories of the partisan movement as something that has been unifying. So this is the final point that I wish to make, and also the unions of the soldiers from the last war. In many cases, they are claiming to have independence. They want to revive the memories of the World War II, but they are divided between Republika Srpska and Federation, and they're receiving actually government support. So their points of view of the World War II are very often also reflecting what is currently happening in the political sphere. So there is no independence, so to speak. And in terms of the internet and blogs and conspiracy theories, there are very many conspiracy theories. This it's full of them. I did not even quote, but in my paper you will very often see that we blame them, the international community. They've done it all on purpose, just to show how bad we are. And international community is very often used by all sides. It's not only one or the other. I would say it's just more prominently seen in the case of Banja Luka. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing is a question for discussion. I think, in my view, and this is just my very personal view, I think it's good to have these things out there because, as I mentioned already in the case of World War II, these theories have been there, but they have not been present in the public space. The fact that you have them now present on the internet is just reflecting that they exist. The truth is, how do you interpret this and critically look at them? Because one of the things is that, yes, they are there, but it's also clear if you attempt to look critically at certain events and their significance, it's very clear, it's very easy to deconstruct them. But in my own view, I think they should be there because they are reflecting actually what is going on. Yeah, thank you.
To paraphrase your two questions, the first was, it seems that there in Carinthia are very separated memories, a lot of memories. How is the chance, or is there a chance to come together?
Yeah.
and the second, do Slovene organizations do care on the memory or identity?
Yeah.
I will start with the second, because they are, of course, connected to each other, the questions and the answers. I mean, to point it out very stereotypically, if you want to be part of a Slovene minority in Carinthia, then you have to remember Second World War, you have to remember the suffering of your family members, or Slovenes, Carinthian Slovenes suffering under Nazi socialism. I think the group identity of Slovenes is very connected with the memory on the suffering of the victimization, let's say. In other terms, we could speak that even today's youth, it's young people, 15, 20 years old, are agents of memory on this topic. They carry on the family narratives, they carry on, for example, the suffering of their grandparents or grandparents. And in comparison to the German-speaking dominating population, this is a big difference, because what we recognized in the interviews, now we are interviewing the second generation of those family members, which I told before in the interviews. And there was a big break there was no passing on of the memories to the second generation, to the children of these contemporary witnesses of the majority populations, let's say. So there's a really big difference. The Slovenes in Carinthia had a lot of organizations since 1955, since the last Allied army soldiers left Austria. They had big organizations, huge organizations, gathering, connecting, and giving people and their ancestors the opportunity and possibility to remember and to share memory. And the remembrance process there is really an ongoing process. I think it's very interesting to connect this topic of memory and remembering, in this case, in terms to group identity or identity, personal identity, of course, also. And I think the organizations, which are private organizations, which are partly, let's say, financed by official fundings, they play a very big role. And the other big role, of course, is played by, let's say, family structures and the family memory, let's say. But of course, there is not really, let's say, cultural memory in terms of Assmann connecting and gathering the Slovene minority memory. Of course, there is literature, there is a lot of cultural projects, but it's not, let's say, really institutionalized as an official memory. It's more a minority memory, of course. And in the last decades, this is kind of changing. It is around the year of 2000, 2005, where things are really changing. There are not just any more Slovene institutions, Slovene organizations, but also, let's say, mixed organizations or institutions who carry on memory, the alternative memory, the memory of the minority, let's say. There are projects of memory sites which are not just sharing one version of the history or the other. For example, partisan memory sites were just hidden in the woods or hidden on very high mountains, on private places. In the official places, there were, for example, memory sites of the German Wehrmacht soldiers which came back. So there were really separated memories. However, in the last decades, there are mixed languaged institutions, organizations who now present a new memory. So I think there is the chance to come to another, to a third, fourth option, or to more options, which the chance has not been before 25, 30 years ago. And what we try in this project is we try to monitor what is going on right now. We think this process now is very important because we could somehow live monitor what is happening. And we try also to connect this with a generation question. For example, we are now in the third, fourth generation after the Second World War, more than 70 years ago. This all happened. The third, fourth generation, from a very simple point of view, they are not emotionally connected that much, most of them. Although, for example, they are in a minority population, they carry on, they are agents of memory. However, it's possible for them to work on new narratives together with other youth, let's say. Yeah.
Yes.
So, I have a question for Andreas and then Azra. So when Rencièr's reading of the Deleuze and Lyotard, when he tried to establish the aesthetics of any regime of thought, any form of thought, he says basically there is a finitude in every human being and our existence, and because of finitude, we become aware of our affective quality of the. It shakes us up, and we become aware of affective quality of every aesthetic presentation. So the reason I'm saying I'm trying to look at the finitude, because if the memories are actively reconstructed, and there is basically they become infinite objects of thought or infinite thoughts that basically they slip us. So, however, if somehow in the use of the Rencière you be able to reconcile this idea of finitude and constant reconstruction of memory, then we are in a very good way of opening a defense on why the regions of memory can be imprecise. So there is this paradox of the finitude of us as a people who construct the memories, and meanwhile there is a constant reconstruction of memory and has its own sovereignty by itself. So these paradoxes in the use of the theory of Rancière, it can be resolved the way you're quoting him. Then we are in a very good start how to look at the regions of memory in a very imprecise way. And to Azra, is there any difference in the content of the post which you see on the social media when the posts are sent actually when the people are visiting the site of memory? If the people are sending the post when they are at the site of memory, is there any difference in the content and the forms and the way they write their posts in the social media?
For me, these two cases are very much interesting because it is about memories in the border zone. But usually, if I remember correctly, once I read about 50 memoirs of the people who were living in Gdansk around the Second World War, and their memories actually based on their everyday life experiences were quite different from the territorialized memories about the Second World War. So they were neither Nazi supporters nor Polish nationalists. Just their world was quite different from the world that both political power had imagined. But usually when we approach to the memories in the border zone, especially after what happened, right? These sort of the landscape of post-memory tends to be shaped into the territorial topography that has been shaped after the war or after the conflict. So I think that there might be a certain hybridity of the memories of the people who had lived in this border zone, but of course sometimes their memories are also shaped by the certain narrative template that had been formed after the war, after the conflict. So did you find any such, how can I say, such a tiny room to find the hybrid or different ambivalent memories from those people, even though they are remembering what happened in their past according to the narrative template, dominant narrative template, but on the other hand, might be there are certain places or certain spaces where this dominant narrative template did not infiltrate, did not penetrate. So they just keep their own, how can I say, autonomous spheres in their everyday life, which actually they remember in a totally different light or a different way. Right? So this is my question.
Yes, please.
I have a question for Azra. I couldn't quite follow when you described the situation with the memorial complex in Mostar, and I wanted to ask you if the personality of the author of the complex, Bogdan Bogdanovic, does it have any role in the debates over that particular memorial? And also one more question. Was it ever discovered who vandalized Bruce Lee's nunchake? And whether that had any kind of importance with the events around that monument?
Okay, maybe you can reply to these three questions.
Thank you very much for the question. I just want to start with the first question about finitude and infinite possibility of memories, or I don't know how to summarize it, but the short answer would be yes and no. 3 weeks ago, an expert for law in Austria was interviewed if Greece is able to ask Austria to get payments of reparation like they ask Germany. And the law expert said, well, it's not possible for Austria because Austria was never a perpetrator in the Second World War. They were, of course, not. They were the first victim, and so Austria doesn't have to pay anything. So good for us. So that's, I like the notion of police, following Rancière's notion of police, how, and you can see it, how the politicians are working on stuff a police is doing and not on doing politics in that kind of sense. And I like his way of stressing the political thought of changing something, of struggling, having struggle with something, to compete with something, to invite also the youth and the people to say, okay, well, you're not now suppressed or oppressed with the historical facts that you go in school and you learn the dates from that the war started and the war ended and how many victims there have been and so on. And you can do anything about it. I did a research project with pupils in a theater project where they talked about their own experience of exclusion and coming to Austria as a foreigner and what experiences they had. In combination of the historical and letters and stories of victims and perpetrators, to find parallels and differences and to see, okay, where is their part in history when we talk about National Socialism? Do they have a part in that too? And I like to say yes, and how it is possible to change also the memory and to do something within and to be an active participant in the field of memory, and also to see that the youth has a very important part in that. Also 70 years after the war, that they can play an active role and be political in that kind of sense. And I also like the idea of equality in that context of Rancière, where he says that everybody has the same ability to contribute, and also in that context of memory studies, that we are allowed and able to contribute to build the memory with our own experiences. Not to say that there are no historical facts. They are there, but we can build on the basis of historical facts our own history within the discussion with other people. I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope I slightly did.
So the first question, whether there is any difference in the content of the posts as opposed to visits, I can maybe comment on the content that I found in online magazines and obviously in individual interviews. That would be most appropriate. I would say yes, there is definitely a difference, because what you find in online magazines is usually the statements of the politicians who are saying whether a particular memorial site is important or not important, and then they try to find a representative from a particular group that's advocating or opposing the erection of a particular monument. And also when it comes to the interviews, I particularly had difficulty in trying to arrange interviews in Banja Luka, video officials. In most cases, people were unavailable. This was the explanation that I received. But I had very good interviews, for example, with representatives of the veterans of the World War II Association. And for them, they saw me actually as someone who is just to be praised for the interest in this area. But the difference that I want to highlight is, for example, in the context of the 12 babies of the memorial sites. very often the posts go beyond the tragedy itself that they commemorate. So, you know, so they go to description, as I mentioned, you know, for example, the role of international community, the character of the war. They're talking about the names of the streets, and then in some cases they even go as far as to comment on social policies, on the fact in terms of what political forces are doing. In the case of Sarajevo Roses, they are talking about necessity to keep them. So there is a call for political action, just like in the case of Mostar. So, and people feel there is a very emotional component in terms of like, we need to do this, we need to change this. And when you look at memorial sites from World War II, the same is, you can observe a couple of things. Very often people will post photos of their own visits to those sites, so you have this artifact nature of the visit. So whether it's being nostalgic, you know, about the times, or glorifying the great past that was shared. But in some cases they're also saying, yes, we all need to unify, we need to do something. And what has remained unclear is that in some cases, apart from the call of action, which you could also see in the case of Sarajevo, there didn't seem to be a massive result. Like, let's say we have now mobilized and we are going to do something. You can find sporadic initiatives of people to gather, but mostly when it comes to the content of posts, I would claim that there is a difference rather than what you would generally say. When it comes to the case of Mostar and the role of Bogdan Bogdanovic, who is the designer of the partisan graveyard and who has been seen as one of the major architects because he has also designed the memorial site in Jasenovac. If you look on Facebook sites and if you look at some of the blogs, his role is prominently featured there, but in none of the comments have I seen, you know, how important it is. Some people do mention it, but I have not seen that there has been some attention given to it, and mainly because this memorial site is really reinterpreted from the point of view of the current conflict. And whether it has been discovered who has vandalized Dunčake from Bruce Lee, this case has never been resolved. What happened as a consequence to that, as I mentioned, is that the authorities decided to move the memorial. So the monument of Bruce Lee was kept for 2 years, somewhere in the cellar, and then it was brought up for a day in Mostar, and then on the initiative again of the citizenry, they decided to put it back because there was a call that, you know, this is something that citizens saw of significance for the city, because it had a symbolic capital for some people, that not only would Mostar be seen as a divided city, but also as a tourist site where people not only would they come and see the old bridge, but they could also see Bruce Lee. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're almost done. There is one short question.
Yeah.
Last question.
If I allow.
You didn't answer my question.
Sorry.
I will try it. I think the question was if if a layer or surface could be found which connects then different narratives to a third one. I think this is very important in this case because memory is very political in Carinthia. I think also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course, but in Carinthia too. For example, in terms of Carinthian Slovenes, stereotypically spoken, we have old communistic Slovenes which wanted to connect southern Carinthia to Yugoslavia, who for decades after Second World War still worked, engaged on connect to Yugoslavia. On the other side, you've had very Catholic Slovenes which didn't like partisans very much, and of course they were interpreting all these things differently. On the German-speaking population side, you have a very strong connection to right-wing politicians, of course. And if, for example, old soldiers meet nowadays, or in decades ago, there were a lot of right-wing politicians speaking there, of course. It is very political, and I think it's also interesting for the new generation, for today's youth. They are not thinking or remembering that much political anymore, and this could be such a surface which connects narratives from different sides. For decades, narratives which were oppositing, for example, conflicting, and I think it is very important, at least for Carinthia, that the politicians and politics are not playing that important role anymore in this case. Yeah.
One remark or question to Azra. Speaking about the Bosnian War in Warsaw, well, I have to remind Tadeusz Mazowiecki. He was a remarkable opposition activist and the first non-communist prime minister in post-war Poland. And of course, he was the High Commissioner of the United Nations on the Bosnian War between 1992 and 1994. And he resigned after, well, his dissatisfaction about the lacking support by the European Union and by the United Nations. And he wrote a very readable final report about his efforts in the Bosnian War. Did he came across in your interviews in Bosnian, or in general, how he is remembered, or is he at all remembered his name or his figure in this conflict?
No, unfortunately not, since when I was conducting interviews, it was the semi-structured interviews, and I was trying to look at individual interpretations of given memorial sites, so it was not the main focus. But I think what is when you mention him, I think there are many individuals who felt very strongly and who raised their voices regarding the violence that was happening at the time in Bosnia. And these individuals are mainly remembered in the academia. What you see mainly is that the international community is seen as this hybrid construction, that international community is a composition of people mainly from the West and America, and that they are the ones who came somehow as colonizers trying to resolve the issue without knowing what was happening on the ground. And this is why you have the Dayton Peace Accords that has not actually resolved anything but has perpetuated the conflict as it is today only in political sphere. And it's this international community which is also now continuing to have very strong influence, which is almost a few years ago, one prominent dean of the law faculty, he was claiming that now in Bosnia we have officially 3 constituent people, so Bosniaks, Croats, and Serbs. But he said there is a 4th major player, and this is the international community. They are not, and why I'm mentioning that is that they are actually seen as the 4th equal player, bringing something else. They're not seen as above or below, or they are not trying to bring a new narrative, but they are become interwoven in the current politics. And I think that's why I'm saying certain individuals, yes, they are remembered for their particular role, but overall there is this hybrid interpretation of the term international community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear speakers. 8:30, audience. Then we finish this first workshop.